Bonsoir à tous ceux qui nous rejoignent pour cette dernière journée des rencontres du développement durable, des premières rencontres du développement durable co-organisées par l'Institut Open Diplomacy, aujourd'hui avec Audencia, mais plus largement avec le soutien de 50 partenaires, des organisations internationales aux associations, des universités, aux grandes entreprises, des think tanks, aux sondeurs et aux observateurs de l'opinion. Nous avons fédéré large pour pouvoir inspirer l'action, l'espoir aussi d'une certaine manière. Et nous avons le plaisir d'en discuter pour cette ultime masterclass avec Selwyn Hart, qui est le secrétaire général adjoint des Nations Unies, chargé de l'urgence climatique. Et je vais modérer cet échange avec lui en anglais jusqu'à 18h50. Nous aborderons ensuite la table ronde de clôture de ces rencontres du jour, co-organisées avec Audencia, et nous terminerons sur une note finale avec Bérangère Abba, qui est la secrétaire d'État à la biodiversité. Selwyn Hart, I hope you're well connected and you hear me.
Yes, sir.
Very welcome to our conversation. You know that the Rencontres du Développement Durable are meant to connect citizens to global actions as well as local leadership to advance the SDGs as we mark the 5th anniversary. And obviously climate emergency is one of the top priority on the agenda of those meetings. So I'm very pleased to host you, and I hope we will have a great conversation. If I may, I will rephrase some time to make sure that the citizens who hear us perfectly understand what is at stake when you speak with the language of the UN, which is a language that needs further explanation sometime. My first question is obviously about climate emergency as we face the climate crisis. States have declared a climate emergency. Cities in France have declared a climate emergency. This is the case of Strasbourg. This is the case of Nantes. This is the case of Bordeaux. Cities where we're supposed to host the Rencontres du Développement Durable all the week. And there is a reason why behind that is that the trajectory we are taking to achieve carbon neutrality is not the right one. We are way beyond the +2 degrees target that we agreed upon at the Paris Climate Agreement back 5 years ago. Do you share that sense of emergency looking at the trajectory we have? The IPCC says we are probably going +3 degrees. Is it exactly also what you have in mind and the hypothesis you're working on?
Thank you so much. And I really want to thank all of you for inviting me to participate. And I really look forward to an engaging and stimulating discussion with all of you. And I cannot agree with you more. We are in the midst of the most serious crisis facing humanity. The climate crisis, while we are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, the climate crisis has not abated. In fact, it has gotten even worse. The reality is that global emissions have returned to pre-pandemic levels. The World Meteorological Office confirmed this just a few weeks ago. Global emissions are at their highest level in history. We are approaching the 1.5 degree temperature limit, which is part of the Paris Agreement, a key component of the Paris Agreement. We're approaching that limit much faster than previously anticipated. And the last 5 years in history have been the warmest on record. So we are in a planetary emergency. And it's not only what the scientists are saying, and you are correct, we are on a pathway to 3 degrees, not 2 degrees or 1.5, but 3 degrees. It's not only what the scientists are saying, but what we're actually seeing all over the world. From unprecedented wildfires across our world in the United States, in California, we've seen them. We've seen them in Australia. We've seen them in the Amazon, to record an unprecedented cyclones in terms of their intensity and frequency in the Pacific and in the Caribbean, where I'm from, to droughts and floods all over this world. So in addition to what the scientists are telling us, we're actually seeing worsening climate impacts in our daily lives and all over the world. So I share this sense of emergency. I share this sense of crisis. And at moments like this, we need all hands on deck, hands on deck to respond with a high sense of urgency and ambition to solve this crisis.
And sir, may I ask that question? We are looking forward to the next step to boldly act against that crisis. We were expecting by the next month, but it's not going to happen, the COP26, which was supposed to be the 26th conference of the framework conference of the UN on climate change, which was expected to actually review and assess the intentionally national determined contribution to achieve the Paris Agreement. What it means is how states want to contribute to achieve carbon neutrality as soon as possible and to transform their economy to something less carbon intense. And that COP is not going to happen while 72% of French citizens express in a survey we have conducted with Focus 2030, they expect more than the climate agreement of the Paris Agreement. They would have expected something bolder than +2 degrees, and we are already there. So, based on your position at the UN system and within this coordination of states to achieve the Paris Agreement, how do you assess the efforts that the international community should have provided and highlighted on that COP that's not going to happen?
Thank you so much. And 5 years ago, when we met in Paris, it was really a victory for multilateralism. It was a victory for climate. The leadership of France in securing the Paris Agreement will, I believe, go down in history as one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of the United Nations. But we knew back then that simply agreeing on this agreement was not enough. We would need countries then to significantly increase the level of ambition that they committed to in Paris in terms of the intended or nationally determined contributions, which is just a UN way of saying a national climate plan for each country. And that process started in earnest over the course of the last 5 years. And COP26 in Glasgow was supposed to be that moment where countries would revise and submit more ambitious NDCs. And we've seen a number of countries indicate that that despite the postponement of the Glasgow conference, they will still undertake that task of revising and updating and submitting more ambitious NDCs. And we've seen some remarkable leadership from the European Union. The President of the Council has recently put a proposal to governments to increase the European Union's NDC or National Climate Plan from a 40% reduction to an at least 55% reduction, setting a 55% limit as the floor for the EU's level of ambition. And that has been, it has sent an extremely positive signal to the rest of countries, and it has also established a very clear benchmark for ambition across the world. So the EU must be congratulated on this. However, I also wish to raise a point outside of the framework of the nationally determined contributions, and it is about the recovery spending that countries have already started to put in place. The reality is that if countries don't seek to recover from the COVID crisis through this various stimulus plans and measures in a way that is compatible with the goals of the Paris Agreement, then we will have no hope of reaching the goals of the Paris Agreement. So my encouragement to all of you and to your colleagues and friends and those listening is really, as you press governments to update their NDCs, the near-term action is around the stimulus packages that are being announced by governments.
And I'd like to point it out. We've had that conversation with many other international leaders during this week. We have spoken over this issue with Vice President of the IPCC, Hugh Bassacona, with co-chair of first group of the IPCC, Valérie Masson-Delmotte, with your fellow at the UN, the chairman of the UNSCSN, Jeff Sachs. They all told us that it's impossible to deliver on the climate agreement without aligning recovery against the COVID-19 crisis with the SDGs. And as the Assistant Secretary General of the UN for Climate Emergency, I'd like to hear you more about how you would recommend to align recovery plans and dealing with this crisis with a more holistic approach for fair transition, which is the SDGs. We both need to address the health issue, the social consequences in the aftermath of that crisis, and to think of the long term. Isn't that too much on our plate?
A very good question, but I don't think it is. What this crisis has done, and I'm talking about the COVID-19 crisis, is that it has disrupted societies and economies, as well as our personal lives. And we've had to do things that we never thought that we would ever have to do. Economies were shuttered for weeks and months. We've had to practice social distancing. Our children have been out of school for months, and some have not been able to return to in-person classes. We've not been able to visit friends and family for weeks and months. Certain industries like tourism have been shuttered. So, and it has also laid bare deep and systemic inequalities within countries and across countries and societies. And I believe that at a moment like this, we really need to use this crisis as an opportunity to reimagine development. For us to reimagine how we have harmony with nature and harmony among ourselves as well. And we owe it to the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized, as well as to future generations, not to rebuild as we were, but to build back better and recover better in a way that ensures sustainability, inclusiveness, and fairness.
Mr. Hart, you've used the term crisis and say it's both a risk and an opportunity, and that's the very etymology of that term in Greek. And as you've commended the European action to deal with the crisis and to recover from the crisis with this Green Deal and this plan Next Generation EU, I'd like to benchmark with this European approach to it, not by pride, but because we need it. And I like to compare it with two other global players, two other main powers that are as influential as the EU within the UN system, the US and China. As we all know, the Paris Agreement adopted 5 years ago has been ratified by almost the entire international community, not some states like Iran or Yemen, which are struggling with war issues. There is one state which has broken the international consensus and removing and withdrawing itself from the Paris Agreement. It is the United States. And we always hear that it is not that bad whether the US is in or out. The White House may be out, but the governors, the states within the US, have a role to play and can contribute to achieve the climate agreement that we adopted 5 years ago. Do you share that context and that analysis, and do you also look specifically at how the US is now approaching the environmental issues in the context of their national elections?
Well, there's a lot that I can say and a lot that I can't say as a UN official.
Sure.
But we definitely want all major emitters to be part of the Paris Agreement framework. But we are seeing some really great things, not only in the United States, but across the world from many subnational governments. Subnational governments that have used this crisis as an opportunity to reimagine how energy is produced and used, to reimagine how transport systems are developed and utilized in urban centers. So definitely cities and states in large countries like the United States, like many of the larger European countries, like China, like India, like Japan, like Korea, the role of cities, states, and other subnational governments as being part of the solution to the climate crisis cannot be overemphasized.
Of course.
And
sir, I know that the UN system is based on the respect of sovereignty of national states. That's a no-brainer. We all know that. But you just highlighted what is the most important in the way we could accelerate the transition and the implementation of the Paris Agreement is involve subnational actors. Is there a way that you're working on within the UNFCCC or at the UN to embed subnational governments within the Paris Agreement? We all know about the C40, we all know about the L20, which are major players at the global stage to bring in local communities to achieve a climate fight. How at the UN level you can work out on that, and how you can foster involvement of local governments into the Paris Agreement?
Okay. There are multiple ways, and there are multiple entry points. One of them was an entry point which was created by Laurence Tubiana and her wonderful team, who created a track under the UN FCCC framework that is led by two individuals, which are called climate champions, and their job is specifically to mobilize support for ambitious climate action from non-state actors, from civil society, from the private sector. Laurence Tubiana was one of the first climate champions, and the climate champions are nominated by the current and former COP presidents. So this year you have a climate champion from the UK and you have a climate champion from Chile, and the climate champions, they work with these groups. They are supported by the Secretariat of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and this is one really great innovation that emerged after Paris under Laurence's leadership, and this is one entry point. Another entry point, is the coalitions that were launched last year under the UN Secretary General's Climate Action Summit. Last year, he invited coalitions across various sectors, from the energy transition to transport to adaptation and resilience, to come together to address the climate challenge. And over 40 coalitions were launched at this summit, and these coalitions continue their work. Many of them have grown. Despite the COVID crisis, they continue to deliver ambitious climate action. But key is ensuring that we have an all-hands-on-deck approach.
Absolutely.
We need states, we need the private sector, civil society, and youth.
And we will look closer at how coalitions can play a good role in accelerating the transition. But if I remain at the political level of states, I was referring to the US before. I would like now to speak a bit more about China. We all know that China has announced last week at the UN General Assembly they want to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2060, which is a good news. 5 years ago, right before the Paris Agreement, they also took strong commitments to divide by 2 their carbon emissions, which is obviously for the main polluters something that is a key game changer, obviously. But at the same time, we can't help thinking the fact that as a member of the Security Council and as a global emitter of pollution, China is maybe tempted to use in a political game that role as a carbon neutral leadership. We all know that they have to face the responsibilities in the Uyghur crisis. They have to also address the international community in the way they handled Taiwan or Hong Kong. Can we think that, can we trust China in being a climate leader without politicizing that role of leadership?
Well, we as a UN and in my role as the SG on climate action, it's really just to focus on how we can get all countries to make ambitious commitments on climate action. And the announcement made by China, by President Xi Jinping, was certainly, it was encouraging. We need China's very strong leadership on climate action and climate ambition. To put this into context, this was really the very first time that we saw China make this type of announcement on net zero or indicate that it will be achieving net zero by a date certain in the mid-century. This is massive, not only from a political perspective, but China is also the largest energy market in the world.
Sure.
And the signals that this sends to markets on the inevitability of the decarbonization of the global economy is absolutely is more than enormous. Of course, the devil will be in the detail. This longer-term commitment will need to be supported by near-term raising of ambition, including through the submission of a more ambitious NDC that is aligned with a net zero pathway. But it really is a good start. And we're hoping that this will incentivize other developing countries and other major emitters to come forward with more ambitious targets. Now, I'm not going to speculate in terms of what was behind this announcement, but from a climate perspective, it has really generated a sense of excitement and momentum.
Yeah. It is indeed a good news, and we can't hope more than that, because as we all know, China is representing in itself 25% of global emissions at the global stage. So obviously this commitment was expected and it was a good news for every citizen in the world. At the same time, I'm asking myself, I'm wondering, in the position you have as the Assistant Secretary General for Climate Emergency, do you also look at, when they take such commitments, on the way they use the SDG framework to implement, to achieve carbon neutrality? We all know that China is a country where inequalities are very high. The territory is very divided between rural and urban populations, which don't face the climate crisis in the same way. So, in the logics of inclusion, of care, of leaving no one behind, that is the headliner of this 2030 agenda of the SDGs, how do you use that framework to assess such commitment from China, for example?
Well, the SDG framework is not limited just to China. It's the beauty of the SDG framework is that it applies to all countries. But when this framework was agreed to 5 years ago, it was a successor to the MDG framework, which was a framework, as you know, just limited to developing countries. So the universality of the SDG framework is definitely one of the positive aspects of it. The Secretary General and the Deputy Secretary General have repeatedly said that the blueprint for the recovery from the COVID crisis and the blueprint for addressing the climate crisis has to be the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement. And the SG has specifically identified 6 climate positive principles or 6 climate positive actions to guide the recovery from the COVID crisis. And one of them is leave no one behind. This is something that the Secretary General has repeatedly said as he outlined these 6 climate positive principles. We must ensure that as we recover from the COVID crisis and as we make the transition that is necessary to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, that no one is left behind. And this we must address inequality. We must address those peoples and communities as well who will be most affected by the transition, be it the climate vulnerable or be it those that are connected to industries and sectors that will not survive or will need to be transformed if we move to a decarbonized society. I know that within the context of the European Union, you have done a lot of advanced work on this, on creating, for example, this Just Transition Fund as part of your recovery efforts. These lessons, I believe, need to be taken to the global community as countries as well make this make and accelerate a transition to a decarbonized economy.
Yeah, you were right pointing out the fact my question was not directly regarding China, but more universal question, because obviously everyone is asking that same question. As we mark the 5th anniversary of the SDGs, at the same time of the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, there is a strong need for us to know whether the SDGs are used to assess NDCs from governments to achieve the climate emergency. And we all know, and specifically in France, where we had to cope with the yellow vest crisis, which was triggered by an unfair decision to achieve the transition, we all remember the fact that unfair, unjust transition is absolutely not a transition at all and not able to achieve the climate neutrality. So that was my question. Obviously, we've been speaking about main polluters, the US and China, which take different pathways to address the climate crisis, but there are also many other positive news around the world and news on the way governments can achieve this climate ambition without leaving anyone behind. There is one country that is always a front-running example, which is Costa Rica, as we always remember. Costa Rica has committed to produce more than 98% of its energy with a fully renewable logic. And at the same time, Costa Rica is putting a lot of effort in place to achieve protecting biodiversity and to involve everyone in the transition. Are there other benchmarks like this country you'd like to mention to share to us, best practices you can see and witness from where you stand?
A really good question. And, you know, I am a fan of small countries. I'm from a small country in the Caribbean as well. So I am really excited about the leadership that we're seeing across the world. And we're seeing it in so many different places. And even within countries, we're seeing states and companies and communities taking ambitious climate action. For example, we've seen Nigeria, a fossil fuel producing country, work to phase out its fossil fuel subsidies. We're seeing in Korea, we would definitely have to see a lot more. Korea embedded its Green New Deal as part of its recovery plan from the COVID crisis. We're also seeing Japanese trade associations, press the government to take ambitious action to set a net zero target. So we're seeing all these really great examples all over the world in terms of countries, subnational actors. In Europe, we've seen the city of Milan, close many of its streets to vehicular traffic. The state of California recently announced that the phase out of the internal or the sale of the phase out of internal combustion cars. So we're seeing all of these really great examples, but we need leaders. And one of the key lessons from the Paris Agreement was leadership. Leadership matters, and countries will need great examples and good examples if we are going to accelerate the decarbonization of the global economy and ensure climate security for every inhabitant on this planet.
And sir, I have received so many questions from our audience here to ask you. There is one I'd like to share with you. It's a question from a young man called Hippolyte. And Hippolyte says he's actually marking his own birthday today as we speak. And he says he's 22, and he says, how can I celebrate my birthday in a world that is going that way with climate emergency? Can I hope something? Last year at the UN General Assembly, he remembers that was the speech of Greta Thunberg ending with "How dare you?" And we had no speech like that this year at the 75th anniversary of the UN. But the question remains: how dare you? Not yourself, of course, but how can we bring home? Hope to Hippolyte for his birthday. What would be your message to youth?
Well, I wish to wish him happy birthday. He has said it's a very hopeless situation, and his birthday, on a very personal note, comes a few days after the birthday of my daughter, who turned 15. Just on Sunday, and I also reflected on her future as well. And if we don't solve, she has not been in school since March because of the COVID crisis. She recently restarted the online learning. But if we don't solve the COVID crisis, she will, as well as the billions of other young people, will grow up in a world that will be more unequal, more unsustainable. And right now, governments are mobilizing trillions of dollars to boost economic growth and create new jobs as a result of the COVID crisis. And it's that generation that will have to repay these trillions of dollars. So in addition to possibly facing climate insecurity, it could potentially be one of the most indebted generations in history.
Sure.
I don't want them to give up hope. They cannot give up hope. I am really encouraging them to be vocal, extremely vocal advocates for climate ambition, for fairness, for justice, and for equity. The reality is we can still address many of the worst impacts of climate change. We can still, science is telling us that we can still meet the 1.5 degree goal. It will require radical transformation of the global economy. It will require radical transformation of global societies. But we've seen the disruption that COVID causes. We've seen how COVID, if we don't prepare ourselves, if we don't address a crisis, if we don't believe and respond to what science is telling us, we see what the consequences are. So I encourage all young people, don't lose hope, but at the same time, be vigilant, be vocal, be active. You're fighting for your future. And I am not offended. I'm never offended when young people ask questions like this, because my generation, we are deciding your future, and you should have a say in those decisions. So my encouragement, please, you know, to your political leaders, to your community leaders, act as private citizens, to your parents, please advocate for a more sustainable, fair, and equitable world. It is in your fighting for your future.
And sir, I received another, and that will be the last question before you can conclude with your own remarks. I received another question from another young woman called Yasmin. She tells me that she hears everywhere that women will be more affected than men by the climate crisis, that she fears facing increasing inequalities while she already faces many of them, lacking of opportunities, lacking of resources, sometimes violent aggressions as she's a woman. And we all hear in France that we will be soon entering in the Generation Equality campaign of the UN, since we mark the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Conference on women and men equality. What can you tell to Yasmin about how, as a woman, she can hope that the climate crisis will not affect her more than a brother or a father or a cousin?
Yasmin, I really encourage you to remain a very strong advocate for your rights. And you are correct. There is a very strong gender dimension to the climate crisis. It is those vulnerable groups across both rich countries and poor countries that are most severely impacted by the climate crisis. And this is why, as we design climate policy, we need to design that policy through a gender lens, through a gender-sensitive lens. So I really encourage you to continue, as I said previously, to press for the highest level of climate ambition. As we go through the just transition, as we look at supporting peoples and communities that are most badly affected by the transition to a clean energy future, we cannot forget the gender dimensions. The gender dimensions must be a critical aspect of the discussions on the just transition. So for me, it has to be about urgency and ambition and ensure that gender is integrated across all of these discussions on climate.
So thank you for your call for courage and for action to use to women to keep up the fight. Is there anything last you'd like to share with us before we get to the conclusion of this Rencontres du Développement Durable?
No, thank you so much for your very tough questions. But this is the type of discussion and conversation that that officials from the United Nations need to have with our clients, because we serve you. We serve at your pleasure. We serve humanity. So this has really been a great conversation. And the reality is 75 years since the creation of the United Nations, we are at a critical juncture. And more than ever, we need each other. We need all hands on deck. We need a strong multilateral response, strong multilateral solutions to address some of the most pressing global challenges. Challenges like climate change, challenges like COVID, challenges like inequality. So with your support, with the support of everyone that is listening, let us work together to create a better world for planet, and a better world for people. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Mr. Hart, thank you. That's dear to my heart. On behalf of the Open Diplomacy Institute, I must say we are very honored to host you, and we will. The tough questions come with also tough commitment from our side to help you in designing these policies and getting along with you in bringing everyone into the conversation and into the action. So as soon as you touch base in France, let us know. We will host you and connect you with as many young people in France who definitely will hear to you and follow your lead in addressing that crisis. And when we get to New York at some point when the COVID-19 crisis is over, we will definitely try to touch base too. Thank you so much. I'll have to conclude in another official language of the UN, in French, if I may. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Hart, pour cette conversation et vos encouragements, votre appel à l'action. C'était la dernière masterclass de nos rencontres du développement durable, co-organisée aujourd'hui par l'Institut Open Diplomacy avec Audencia. On va avoir cette table ronde de clôture avec quelques surprises à nouveau, et on terminera avec notre allocution finale délivrée par la secrétaire d'État chargée de la biodiversité, Bérangère Abba. Monsieur Hart, bonne chance, bon courage. All best luck in dealing with the climate emergency. We are with you. You can count on us, and whenever you need us from youth, from Europe, you can definitely call us to join your fight. Be in touch. Have a safe ending of the UN General Assembly, and we will be with you.